Some say that 2019 was the best year for phones, and I can agree with that. The Sony Xperia 1 line was started. We saw the start of foldable, with phones like the Samsung Fold being one of them, and the announcement of the Razr 4G, though it didn't arrive until 2020. We had other interesting devices like the Samsung A80 and the Light Phone 2. Yes, that last Light Phone was 6 years ago. Crazy. But of course, we get the greats like the Samsung S10 and Note 10 lines, as well as the iPhone 11 series, and the greatest of all, the OnePlus 7 Pro. But near the end of the year, we also got one of the best worst Pixels, the Google Pixel 4. Now on paper, we have great and bad, starting with the 90Hz refresh rate 1080p OLED panel on the front, notch-free. This is a 5.7-inch display with a pixel density of 444, with Gorilla Glass 5 covering it, though it seems like it got its fair share of scratches over the years. That said, the back is also Gorilla Glass 5, but it has this coating, at least on the white one, and makes scratches feel pretty much impossible. The black ones, not so much. Speaking of, we get the controversial camera island, which was leaked by Google first, so it didn't look like they were copying Apple's camera island, which was Google assuming that the leaks for the iPhone 11 were real. It was wild times, and that was before 2020. And just like the iPhone 11, Pikachu face. The metal band that goes around the phone is a nice matte black regardless of which color you buy, with the top housing a microphone, the left housing the SIM tray, though we do get eSIM support, and the right side is where the power and volume buttons are, the former being a different color depending on the color of the back of the phone. We also get Active Edge, which allows for you to squeeze the phone to trigger the assistant, or I guess now, Gemini. Yeah, it would be cool to trigger something else, but it is still pretty cool that we get to use it in the first place. It is sad that Google didn't just keep doing this, with the Pixel 4 and 4 XL being the last of technically 4 models of Pixels to do this. Then we move to the bottom where we get another microphone and a speaker hole, one that pairs with the earpiece with decent stereo sound, though it definitely could be better. By the way, this area is where the Soli radar is, where you can pause music, skip songs, and silent interruptions, which feels like a waste of a radar system, but you can wave your hand over the phone to wake it, have it read your face, and unlock it all in one. This obviously allows for 3D face unlock, and was actually the only Pixel with any face unlock natively until the Google Pixel 7 series. Fun fact, this means just like the iPhone, your front camera doesn't actually even need to see your face for face unlock to work. Yeah. Pretty wild. Obviously, there's no fingerprint scanner on this phone because, that technology didn't exist. Oh, wait. Back to the bottom is where we get the USB-C 3.1 port, which allows for 18 watts of wire charging, which was Google's idea of fast charging forever. This phone supports wireless charging as well, but to charge what? The massive 2,800 mAh battery, which in retrospect was a very Apple move. The iPhone X was a phone with a 2,716 mAh battery that allowed for 3D face unlock and not good battery life, just like the Pixel 4. I can show you past battery stats as this battery started to expand after spending a couple days in my car and forced me to replace the battery. Here's what the battery life looks like now, which isn't too impressive either. And this experience ruined the IP68 dust and water resistance, but let's be honest, this is a 6-year-old phone and it probably expired back when I got this phone in 2021. Moving into the phone some more, we get Bluetooth 5.0 and only Wi-Fi 2.5 and 5 GHz support. So no Wi-Fi 6 as well as no 5G support, which all of that isn't really surprising back in 2019. The phone's vibrating motor is good, but not the best, but still pretty high up there in terms of quality and feel. The phone is powered by a processor that's actually faster than the Pixel 5, the Snapdragon 855, which pairs with 6GB of RAM, 64 or 128GB of storage, and Android 13. All that sounds bad, but only one of them is actually bad. 64GB of UFS 2.1 storage isn't great, especially when 128GB storage was starting to not be enough for phones back in 2019. Android 13 isn't the best either, but there are other phones with better processors from Samsung and other companies that end at Android 13 as well, so it could have been worse. Personally, I've never had issues with RAM on 6GB or higher pixels, so there's that. Size-wise, it's kinda tall for a small phone at 5.79 inches, but at 162 grams, you will actually notice how light this phone actually is. Maybe a smaller battery isn't so bad. Kidding, of course. There are 3 cameras on this phone, the great, okay, and bad. The bad is the front camera, a basic 8 megapixel sensor that is not focusable, only does video at 1080p 30 frames per second, and overall gives serviceable shots, and that's about it. At launch, good enough, but the lack of modern advantages that phones from today get. Then we have a great main camera that is a 12 megapixel sensor, and that's pretty famous, the IMX363. You know, the one in the Pixel 3, 3XL, 3A, 3A XL, 4A, 4A 5G, 5, 5A, and Pixel 6A, not to mention many other phones that are made by Poco, Xiaomi, Asus, Nokia, LG, and ZTE, to name a few. This is an optically stabilized sensor that produces amazing photos and good video, but only up to 4K 30 frames per second. There is no 4K 60 frames per second for no reason other than to allow a 64GB phone to exist, even though Apple allowed for both of those since 2017. The irony is that in 2020, they not only allowed for 4K 60 frames per second out of the same sensor, but they also got rid of the OK sensor, the 2x telephoto sensor. This is a 16 megapixel optically stabilized sensor, which is good, but the larger sensor and aperture means that it doesn't work that well in low light and will sometimes rely on using both cameras and mashing them together with the Pixel core for optical zooming quality that, well, isn't beyond that 2x optical zoom. Still, I find this more useful than the ultra-wide camera that this was replaced by, and again, Google does a great job at making their cameras look better than they are, as not many other phones use this sensor. Allegedly, the OnePlus 7 Pro had this camera, the IMX481, and ironically that was used as an ultra-wide sensor. This is assuming that the IMX481 is actually the sensor that's in the Pixel 4 and the OnePlus 7 Pro, but yeah, that's kind of ironic. This of course is limited to 4K 30 frames per second video as well, but let me show you some shots and videos that I took with this phone. Enjoy. Now for a phone from 2019, this is still pretty great, until you realize that this 64GB phone was $800 brand new. Wow. Again, I find myself using a phone that's good. While it isn't Samsung S20 FE level, this is still a solid phone that feels great because of the operating system and that 90Hz refresh rate. While it's not 120, 90 is still really good and feels like the Pixel 5, another phone that isn't as good as the 60Hz Pixel 6a, but still feels faster because of that refresh rate. The viewing and gaming experience is still pretty solid. Of course, the phone does get warm, but never overheating. The brightness isn't the greatest, sitting at around 400 nits, and I do find myself wishing that it was a little bit brighter. Sometimes outdoor situations weren't great, and the scratches definitely didn't help. But again, when using the phone, I gotta say that I'm still impressed. I didn't feel bogged down by the age of this phone, and that's something that even newer phones don't always do. Lots of negatives in that, sorry for the grammar. I just gotta say, this phone is great. Now, it does suffer the limitations of being from 2019, but it's surprisingly quick, reliable, and perfectly sized. I would say that it will eventually be too old to use, and the battery was never great to begin with, but for now this phone should still be good for about a year or so, at least. The Pixel 4 was kind of like Google showing what it can do if it follows the trend of what Apple was doing at the time and just kept refining their devices. In a way, this is greater than the Pixel 5, which is ironic. That said, the lack of a fingerprint scanner isn't really great. Getting a 64GB phone in 2025 sounds unheard of, but somehow Apple got away with that for, what, almost 8 years? It's not as refined as it could be, as the flexible OLED this phone has means that the chin and forehead should be small, but there's a radar sensor on the top, so that gets a pass, but the chin definitely doesn't. Is this phone worth buying? Probably not. Is it still a good phone? Absolutely, even for the camera alone. And that's my review of the Google Pixel 4, the one with the radar. But let me know what you think, and as always, thanks for joining the 1%, and thanks for watching.